Well, my next guest is making an urgent plea to both sides. Stop the violence. Matthias Schmale is the Gaza director for the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestinian Refugees, and he is in Gaza now. In a tweet, he says the people in Gaza are terrified. He's imploring Israel and Hamas to stop firing at each other, saying it is the civilians who are paying the price. And Matthias joins me now via Skype. And after what was an intense night of military confrontation, as you described, you say people in Gaza are terrified. Just describe what it is like on the ground there.
Good afternoon to you from Gaza, Becky, and thank you for reaching out. The military conflict has continued through the day. You know, it really feels at times like this place is being pounded to the ground. I saw myself a building being hit yesterday and evaporating, basically. But of course, this is not about building. This is about people. I just heard this afternoon that the sister of my communications officer was killed in an airstrike. So this hits home very closely. I was informed this morning by one of our area staff, as we call them, our Palestinian colleagues, that a young girl going to an UNRWA school was hit by shrapnel and now has shrapnel stuck in her chest. And then, was it yesterday or the day before, 4 children were killed as a result of this violence. So it is terrifying. It truly is terrifying. Through the day, we may hear it as we speak. There has been the noise, the ugly sound of war, rockets from here, and then very severe retaliatory strikes from the Israeli side. It is, of course, a day before the end of Ramadan. The Eid festivals are supposed to start tomorrow. And, you know, I sense just among my Palestinian colleagues a sense of terror, but also desperation. Here they are supposedly having to get ready for one of the most important festivities in their religious calendar. And all we worry about is when will this nightmare end?
Matthias, 53 Palestinians and counting confirmed dead in Gaza, including 14 children. That's according to the health ministry. And as you describe, hundreds of civilians wounded. We are talking about an area about twice the size of Washington, D.C. It's tiny, packed with 2 million people. The UN has called on Israel to respect international humanitarian law, which stipulates that airstrikes should only be directed at military objectives. Is Israel respecting international law, or have these airstrikes been indiscriminate, sir?
Well, my honest view is it's been a mixed picture. So I am aware of buildings that have been leveled to the ground where the Israelis did in advance notify the residents of the respective building to get out. So there's clear evidence that they're trying to minimize civilian casualties and fatalities. But then you also have opposite stories. I mentioned the sister of my colleague who got killed. I mentioned the young child that went to an UNRWA school. Now these are, you know, there's just too many people being affected, either through injuries or being killed, to say this is just targeted military precision. You cannot, in a built-up area like this, where people are so densely populated and sitting on top of each other, I think, do a military campaign to precision where you only hit military targets or military operatives.
Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has signalled he intends to expand Israel's offensive against Hamas. Meanwhile, the organisation has threatened to turn the Israeli city of Ashkelon into, quote, hell. The UN, the organisation that you work for, is now voicing fears of a full-scale war. Is that what this feels like? And what are your biggest fears for civilians trapped in Gaza if this conflict continues and escalates?
Well, there's a couple of worries. I must say, I've started saying today, this feels like war. You know, there is a heaviness of rockets going back and forth. You know, hundreds of rockets fired from here, and really hundreds of retaliatory strikes. So this is the beginning of a war, and we can only hope that they will pull back from the brink, and we hope it's not too late. Worries on my side include, this morning we had 100 people come to our compound here next door, a vocational training center we run, because just their building just opposite our compound was targeted. Two apartments were hit, and the people just ran out and ran straight into our compound. Now, in 2014, we had thousands of people housed in our schools, internally displaced people. So one worry is we will see a repeat of that, and we should not forget the COVID crisis is not over. So one of my nightmare scenarios is we'll have hundreds of people crammed into tiny spaces like our schools to run away from this nightmare and to seek protection, and they will be exposed to something else. There's also rumors that the airstrikes will at some point be followed by on-the-ground incursion, and that will for sure lead to people moving. And another thing, if I may, is that the borders are closed. So for the moment, we're not getting supplies in. Fuel will run out on Saturday. That means that the fuel station, the central power plant here, will not be able to operate, and then we don't have enough electricity. That will have a knock-on effect on the already stretched hospitals in terms of, not enough electricity, having to rely on generators and not being able to deal with the COVID crisis or the casualties that are coming in now as a result of this war activity.
Sir, the UN Security Council will hold its second closed emergency meeting today on the escalating violence. Both sides' actions at least they're being accused by their critics as being opportunistic. What role could, or perhaps I should say should, the international community play now in helping to de-escalate this conflict?
I think it's very clear that both sides need to be called to practice the utmost restraint. So that's the first step, that both sides, Hamas here and the Israeli government, are urged to stop violence. Violence is not a solution, but that will not be enough. I think I heard you talk with Ben and others about, this seems a never-ending crisis. And one of my worries is that I've heard younger people, moderate people, as I've experienced them so far in my 3.5 years here, who've started to say, when will we see action? At least I've heard one colleague who said, I hate the rulers here. I don't at all condone violence, but at least they're doing something. The time for talking is over. So that's a worry. And we need to find a way as international community to especially give young children, young people, not just children, young people, a perspective. We should also remember, I don't know if you talked about this earlier, we've just had the elections canceled. There was here in Gaza, actually, until recently, quite a positive momentum. We had over 90% registration of voters, many of them first-time voters. And while they were skeptical about the outcome, just the practice of democracy, being able to go to a voting booth and cast a vote, was important. So it's not enough to just end the conflict. The younger people, all generations, in fact, must be given a perspective for a more dignified and just life, and that requires political processes.
Well, there has been international reaction, and I'm going to get to that next. For the time being, thank you very much indeed for your perspective.